Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name's Chris. I'm the principal at the high school here, and so I appreciate everybody coming out, joining us for some food, and to talk about this topic that is so important and is such a community issue. And I think the thing that we need to think about is that it's not just a student issue or a family issue or a school issue, but it's all of us together. And so hopefully the more events we can do like this, where we're working with parents, working with students, and bringing in our partners from outside, we can get more traction with working with our kids and getting them making better choices. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all of our partners that have helped with this. And I'll hand it off to Ryan.
Cool.
Sound good?
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. My name is Ryan Barry, and I work here in Revere, but I also work in Chelsea as well. And I work with Mass General Hospital's Center for Community Health Improvement, and I also work with the health departments in both those communities as well. So I work for a grant that works with both communities and doing youth prevention work. So I also work in Saugus as well. So I wear a lot of hats, right? So tonight we are going to be talking about nicotine and marijuana vaping. So how many people here have heard about vaping, nicotine, marijuana? Is anyone here? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. All right, so we have a lot of people here who've heard of it. All right, won't ask you if you haven't heard of it. So tonight we're just going to be talking about the substances. It's just going to be a little review, an explanation, and then some things you can do to talk to your child about these things. Tonight we're not judging anyone that uses, whether you're a parent, student, family member, right? We're just talking about what these products are. So what is vaping? So I always start very basically, right? So vaping is just the act of using a small battery-powered electronic cigarette device to heat e-liquids and inhale and exhale aerosol, aka vapor. So one thing we want to try and reframe the conversation is, right, there's actually no water vapor in when kids or when someone vapes, right? As you'll notice, it's an aerosol, right? We also know aerosols from hairspray or disinfectant spray, right? But that's really actually what students are or I don't mean to keep saying students, that's what people are actually inhaling when they are vaping. So there's actually no water vapor in it. That's a big misconception. So these are some examples of nicotine vaping devices, right? This right here was the original electronic cigarette device. So this is kind of how they started. They looked very much like a cigarette. This was kind of tobacco companies' big pitch, right? Like, let's take cigarettes and make them electronic. And that's how they are marketed as such, right? But then we see over time, they start to kind of change. They get a little bit more fancy, a little bit more funky looking almost, right? You have the vape pens, the mods, they're very big. Maybe you have seen these before. They almost look like a little tank, right? But then Juul became one of the most popular brands of nicotine vaping devices. About 4 or 5 years ago, you would have seen these almost everywhere, right? They were everywhere. How many people here have seen some of these devices before? Raise your hand if you've seen some of these devices. Okay. You might have seen them on the ground as trash, right? Or you might see people using them, right? So inside these nicotine devices, right, they come in pod form, they may come in juice form, or salt nicotine, a very high concentration of nicotine. But the biggest thing that we really want to highlight right now, especially things that we're seeing with young people here in Revere, Chelsea, Saugus, really all across the country, right, are these disposable nicotine vaping products. Has anyone seen any of these before? Raise your hand if you've seen any of these before. Right. So these right now, I would say, are probably the most popular brand of nicotine vaping products on the market right now with young people. Anyone want to take a guess why these are the most popular? Easy to carry. Yep, they're very easy to carry, very small. Any other thoughts?
They taste delicious.
They taste delicious. Exactly. Look at some of the flavors, if you can tell here, right? We have mango, strawberry, grape, blueberry. So they taste good, right? When students use them, they don't hurt, they don't burn, right? You just taste this fruity flavor, right? And plus they're very cheap as well, right? Typically, one of these bars could go for about $7, right? And that's nothing, right? Even to like a middle schooler, right? For some kids, right? It's not like you're buying a very expensive drug, right? It's just $7, right? So these are the most popular things that are being used right now as far as nicotine devices. So this is a photo that was taken in one of our communities. They went to like a local school playground and they collected all of this trash. And all of this trash at this school was very much littered with nicotine vaping products, right? As you'll see again, they like banana, watermelon, more watermelon, peach, right? So this was just collected from walking around a local school area. So one thing that we're here for is to talk about what's in them, right? So we've talked about what they are, we've talked about what the devices are, the flavors that come with it, but what is actually in these nicotine ones that aren't really that good for you? So the big three chemicals found in these e-liquids that are inside these nicotine vapes are propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is also found in airplane wing de-icer. Glycerin is also found in nicotine devices. That's also found in antifreeze. But then the biggest one is nicotine, right? Nicotine is the biggest thing that is often found as the biggest thing inside vaping devices. And nicotine, of course, these are damaging, and we'll see on the next slide, but nicotine is that addictive substance that gets kids hooked on them and using them so much, right? And unfortunately, what's really sad is a lot of times people who use them, especially teens, don't even know what is in these products, and they also don't know that nicotine is so addictive, right? They say that nicotine as a drug is actually one of the hardest drugs to try and get yourself off of and break the habit, right? Even more so than some other stronger drugs, because it just has such an addictive nature to it. We'll go over a little bit more later, but these are the three biggest chemicals typically found. There's also this whole other list of chemicals found in vaping devices. So anything that has a check mark next to it has been known to be cancer causing. So you might see some familiar with lead, nickel, tin. Now, not every single vaping device has all of these chemicals in them, but this is just from a study that says a lot of them do. So some of the health effects of nicotine vaping. Just want to go back to this slide real quick. When I say these are the most popular ones, we've for myself, for my job, we've done a lot of focus groups, so small meetings with students, both at the middle and high school. And when we ask kids, what's the most popular brand that kids use, right? It's these ones right here. They're called Puff Bars, Mojo Bars, Mist Bars, Bolt Bars, but right, this Puff Bar one is probably one of the more popular ones. And again, they're so easy because you use them once and you can throw them away.
How they get access to buy this vape?
It's a great question. So the question was, how do they get access to these? So we actually have some data on this from those groups, and as well as a survey that Revere students took. We can talk about that later. But a lot of kids say that they get these from other students in the school, and those students typically get them from people who are older than them, right? So someone who is 21 years old, maybe an older sibling, an older cousin. We haven't heard a lot of people say parents buying them for kids. We don't hear that a lot, which is good. But typically there's like maybe a couple people within a school that may buy them from someone and then they resell them. So it's kind of like almost like a Ponzi scheme, right? Of like that. Yes.
Can I add to that too?
Yes, please.
So the newest trend that we're seeing with students too is distribution via social media. And sometimes it's strangers that they're connecting with and then going and meeting up with that stranger to get a puff bar or get a vape device. So it's kind of a common thing that we're seeing when students are being asked recently about where are they getting it from. It's through social media and sometimes through someone that they don't even know. And some of the kids have owned up to it, to some of the counseling staff and things, saying like, yeah, I don't know who this person is. I just connected with them on Snapchat and told them my location and I met up with them. So as an adult, you're like, oh my goodness, they're meeting up with a stranger. What if in a younger child's mind, they don't really understand the consequences of that. But that's kind of the newer thing that we're seeing, as well as social media as a way that they're gaining access to it.
Yeah.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
So if they're typically affordable and cheap, like around $7 at the store, how much would it be sold in those informal settings? If there's a student that purchases it from another student, is it really higher than that? Is there like any study or how many students are actually?
That's a good question. The question that was just asked is, it's $7 to buy it at a store, but how much may someone be charged outside of that? I feel like focus group data, some kids say that they upcharge it a lot, like it could be maybe $20 for one, $20 for a couple. I think it depends who you're buying from. I don't know.
I don't know the exact data. I also know that some students have reported students are selling it per puff. So they'll meet up with them and say, you're gonna give me $5 for just a puff on the bar. So they're like sharing the puff bar with multiple kids and they sell it per puff on the bar, not just giving it to them. So, but I'm not too sure of price. I don't think it's ever kind of come out of conversations with other people.
Yeah, definitely kind of, that sounds really gross. I don't know why anyone would want to do that.
Coming
but,
out of COVID, yes.
Yeah, but thank you for that question. We appreciate it. But yeah, so before we kept going, I just wanted to highlight that when you think about nicotine vaping, right, because there's two main kinds of vaping, marijuana vaping and then nicotine vaping, right? But for nicotine vaping, these are the most popular brands that we tend to see kids use. And also the biggest thing, we have a slide, I believe, later on, but it is actually illegal here in Massachusetts to be able to sell flavored nicotine products like these. So I couldn't go to the local bodega and be able to buy these, right? I can't go down there and buy a puff bar. So a lot of kids, when they get these, when that person who is the buyer for them, they might drive to a state like New Hampshire where you still can legally buy these, right? So that's where kids are getting them. We used to have reports of kids who would buy them online through like websites, but that doesn't happen as much because there's a lot more ways that make that illegal, right? But I would say the most popular way that people get access to flavored ones is someone older than them driving to, say, New Hampshire, right, and buying them. So New Hampshire's live free or die, right? We're competing with them. Some of the health effects you might find from nicotine vaping. So people who vape have said to have an increased heart rate and blood pressure. Complications related to lung disease and chronic bronchitis, right? That's for a lot of use. Some people have said, some say that insulin resistance, so if you take insulin, it can actually be an inhibitor to that. But then also too, a lot of times you see general complications, right? Like coughing, sneezing, sore throat, dry throat, dry nose, dehydration, headaches. It's tough because that can be anything, right? That could be COVID, that could be a cold, right? But these are just some things that we've been reported to see. But if you're thinking to yourself, does my child that I look out for, right, are they addicted to nicotine, right? That's a little bit more noticeable than some of these things here, right? So what nicotine addiction looks like is it changes the way that your brain functions, right? So the brain, on average, stops developing for an adolescent at the age of 25 years old, right? That's what they say. So at 25, our brains are supposed to be a completed project. I don't know if I'm fully there yet, but I try, right? But 25 is when it's supposed to be completed, right? So up until 25, with our brains being constantly developed, throwing nicotine in the mix is not a good thing, right? It's kind of like if you're building a sculpture and then you start taking parts off of it, or you start using things that aren't as good, and then when you finish the sculpture, it's missing some pieces, right? And that's kind of unfortunately what nicotine, when people use under the age of 25, does to the brain, right? So it affects the prefrontal cortex, so meaning it affects memory, it affects attention span, it increases the neurotransmitter dopamine, so like that happy feeling, right? And it increases the number of nicotine receptors in the brain. So again, it just completely starts to change the whole fragment of the brain, right? It can make people more irritable, like more prone to being like more frustrated quickly, right? So again, using especially under the age of 25 is very damaging, right? Unfortunately, we've heard from some doctors who work with young people through Mass General Hospital who have seen nicotine addiction in kids who are in middle school, right? And they're very irritable. You know, they need, and their body craves nicotine, unfortunately. And what's sad is a lot of those kids who started using years ago didn't know that nicotine was in these products, and then all of a sudden they're in middle school or high school with a nicotine addiction, right? So I can't sit here and say right now that nicotine vaping is the exact same as cigarettes. We need a lot more time longitudinally to be able to say that it's the exact same. But what we do know is that a lot of the same chemicals in cigarettes are also in vaping devices. And we also know that a lot of these vaping devices have actually higher levels of nicotine than cigarettes. So that's something that's really important to note, is the nicotine addiction. So these are just some other studies that have been done. University of California, San Francisco found that vaping can potentially double your risk of heart attack. Johns Hopkins University has said that a lot of the popular vaping devices have the same chemicals as cigarettes, right? Like I was just saying. Kind of a gross one from BU that for Boston University, that it makes like injuries harder to heal when you have a nicotine addiction. But specifically, this is the big one. I hope that a lot of folks take away from tonight, right? That from the Yale School of Medicine, they found that vaping nicotine does not help you quit cigarettes, right? A big selling point of cigarette companies that sell vaping devices, right, is that, oh, no, if you use a vaping product, you're going to stop using cigarettes, right? Now, you may stop using a cigarette device, right, or whatever you use, but you're still addicted to nicotine, right? It's kind of just like taking a step maybe down on a set of stairs, but you look down and you've got 15 more to go, right? That's the big thing, is that you're maybe substituting cigarettes for vaping, but you still have that nicotine addiction. So that's the big thing. All these companies say, oh, you'll quit. But Yale found that actually doesn't help you. So just as a side note, right, we're almost 3 years now into the pandemic, but vaping and COVID-19 together are not a very good combination. So smoking and vaping damages the lungs and weakens the body's immune system. So if you are to get, say, COVID-19 and you use these vaping devices, it can make it more challenging to get over and to fight. It could also help spread COVID-19, as we just heard, right? Kids sharing these devices. And especially those that have a history of smoking cigarettes with COVID-19 has been unfortunately shown to have really adverse health effects, right? So if you know someone that smokes cigarettes or is vaping, right, and they get COVID-19, it could potentially lead to some troubling outcomes. But so like I was talking about with Massachusetts, right, it is unlawful in our state to purchase either online or in retail stores, right, like our corner bodega, right, these flavored products. So again, I could go to the bodega and pick up a vaping device that has no flavor in it, right, that's just plain, right, but I can't go there and buy mint, mango, right, that's not allowed. So, and you can only purchase these products too if you're 21 and older. So that's why we've, in Massachusetts, done a lot of things to make it so teens can't get access to these products, right? So the fact that they get them still is kind of crazy, right? They're jumping through a lot of hoops. So, sorry, just doing a time check here. Cool. So some positive statistics that I think are important to share, right? Because right now it sounds like all doom and gloom, everyone's using, but we had a survey last year here at Revere High School that was also done in the middle school that asked students about their habits of using substances, right? And we found that 72% of students have never even used a vaping product before, right? So almost, 3 out of 4 students have never even tried it before, right? But unfortunately, there's just this kind of perception that, oh, everyone's doing it, we're all doing it, like every child uses, when in fact, right, here at the high school, only 72% have never even tried it. About 7.3% of students have used a vaping product routinely, right? So that's saying that around 7% roughly of students regularly use, right? Maybe regularly addicted, which again, is still a number that we want to get to 0, but it's not as high as maybe some may point out to say. But this I thought was important to share, that here at the high school, students said that 13 to 14 years old on average was around when they first started trying these products, right? So when you think about, your son or daughter or whoever you have at home, right? 13, 14 is kind of that age where you might start to think, okay, maybe they might start trying these a nicotine vaping device. So when we ask students who use these products, what do you put in your nicotine vaping device, right? 50% said they use it with nicotine. 29% said they put it with THC or marijuana inside. But it's kind of troubling, right? 27% of students said they don't even know what's in them, right? So let's see. When we asked students how did they get these devices, these were the most popular ways. So 31% said I borrowed them from someone. 25% said I got them some other way. Now, I got them some other way could be maybe they got them online, got them on social media, but I'd be willing to say that it's probably social media, right? But we didn't put that as an option in the survey. But 11% said a person 18 years or older got them for them, and only 7% said they got them at a vape store, which to me makes a lot of sense because it's illegal to buy them here in Massachusetts under 21, and there are no flavors inside. So again, these are the most popular ways we see it, but from what we hear, outside of this too, unfortunately we hear that social media is one of those ways, right? But it can be really hard, right? How do you monitor your child on social media? That can be tricky. So we're about to move on into the marijuana portion. Sounds weird putting it like that, but are there any questions on nicotine vaping? Yes.
So these are all self-reported numbers, correct?
Yes.
So how accurate can we assume that these numbers are? I know they're done in like an anonymous survey.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how accurate we assume these numbers to be.
So that's a good question. So a lot of times we get this question, right, when we have this data, right? Like, how truthfully do kids respond? Now, I would say in general, kids respond more than likely truthful, right? Because they're taking it by themselves. They're answering. There's no one hovering over them. There's no teacher. Like they may, you might get a couple random kids who talk with their friends, but in general, kids are going to answer truthfully because their name's not on it. There's no way to know, right? And I think that there's this perception that a lot of them after be like, oh, I totally lied. I totally put this, right? But what we're really lucky about is we have a great data and evaluation team who is able to see if there's like a crazy response that we just don't count it, right? So for example, we had a student, not from Revere, but one of my other communities, who answered, I use cocaine, I use marijuana, I use alcohol, I use nicotine, I use heroin, I use every drug under the sun like 99 times a week. Now when you saw that, I think, A, you would know who that student is because they'd be walking around like, my gosh, this person's on a lot of drugs. But also, this is probably a joke, right? Someone did this truthfully. So we're able to see that and be like, we don't count that data, right? So, but there may be some issues, right, where they might misinterpret a question. They might not answer as truthfully because there are some questions that are inherently kind of scary to answer. Maybe you don't want to admit them, but I'd say more than likely than not, students overwhelmingly answer truthfully. So, any other questions on nicotine vaping? So again, there's two kinds of vaping, right? We have nicotine vaping and marijuana vaping. So, anything, Jill or Chris?
One thing I would add too, because I know you're all caregivers, is one of the biggest things we're seeing with the effects on kiddos that are using is a report of the feeling of anxiousness and rapid heart rate. So that's kind of like one of the major signs of like, I've consumed too much nicotine, and it maybe causes a sense of panic, but also could be something that needs to be seen by a medical professional. So that's been the biggest thing, not coughing or anything, but like kid reporting chest pains or rapid heartbeat, feeling overwhelmed, which is also a sign of many other things, but that's been the major thing that especially our medical support staff in the district have seen when a student has come into the nurse's office and they say, oh my goodness, my heart is racing, I feel like I'm like I have a panic attack. And when that support staff starts to ask questions, a lot of the times that student will say and own up to, well, I vaped 20 minutes ago, or I took a hit in the bathroom about 10 minutes ago. So that's pretty much like the biggest sign. Other than also maybe constantly being, again, that sense of agitation and like needing to go someplace because they need to go take a hit of it. It's similar to like if someone was addicted to a cigarette and always constantly needed to go outside and smoke or whatnot. So, but I think the rapid heart rate and that sense of panic and anxiousness is like the biggest sign of nicotine in our teens that have been using it. So.
What, can I add one other thing? Just when you're presenting what the different devices look like earlier, we'll oftentimes, many times, guardians will reach out to a counselor, to an administrator, to Sandra, to one of our family liaisons, and say like, I found this in my kid's room, I found this in my student's bag, what is this? We can help you identify. If you find something that you're curious about, you can reach out to Sandra, you can reach out to your assistant principal, and unfortunately, we know a lot about all of these things. So we can help you identify, oh no, that's marijuana, that's THC, that's CBD, that's nicotine. We can help with that. So if you find something, feel free to reach out to one of us and we can help.
Thank you. Yeah, these are the two. They're in the schools every day, so they're your eagle eyes, right? Same with Sandra, right?
Also to connect to, we have in the school amazing support staff that recently I reached out to the support staff specifically here and I said, can I ask you guys what are our resources already that we have that if a student that we suspect has a substance abuse issue, what are some resources? We have so many connections within the community that we have our MGH Community Center right here that has helped students with nicotine addiction. We have counselors that can connect with outside support, whether it's for a parent that is struggling with a student that has an addiction, or if it's for that teen themselves. So there's a lot of resources that us at the school have. Certain resources, because of COVID, sometimes the support isn't immediately there, but there's so many different avenues, and we have such a skilled support staff that if one doesn't have the answer, somebody else may have 7 different answers for it. So it's also, we're here to support in that way as well, and not just the student, but if the family needs support as well. So.
Also, just want to remind folks, we still have food back there, so feel free to get up if you want to get some more food. All right, so we'll round it out and we'll talk about marijuana or cannabis. So again, I know a lot of y'all might know what some of these things are, but I think it's just helpful to like get the nitty gritty, right? The exact specific of what it is. So marijuana is a plant, also known by its actual or botanical name rather, cannabis. There's almost 500 different chemicals in the cannabis plant. The 2 active ingredients that you may have heard of or be familiar with are CBD or cannabidiol thing, and then THC, which I'm not going to embarrass myself and try and pronounce. So when you think about what's the difference between these 2 ingredients, right? So THC is the psychoactive or mind-altering compound that gives those users that high, right? So when you think about marijuana, you think of the term someone's maybe getting high or, feeling a certain way, right? That's THC, right? CBD does not give you that same feeling, right? CBD you may see get sold in, corner stores or herbal stores, right? A lot of people use it for all kinds of different things, right? But THC is the one that what someone may use to give them that high feeling, right? To kind of change their mindset. You won't get that same from CBD. When we think about, again, where you can buy THC or marijuana products, those are specific marijuana retail stores, right? You can't buy marijuana anywhere else but a dispensary. And I'm sure living in Massachusetts now, if you may see almost every single billboard is for a dispensary today. It's what it feels like, right? So I don't believe there are any in Revere. I don't think Revere has legalized the sales of it. But as far as where people may be able to buy it, I'm not trying to give them free advertising. I'm just telling you where kids may buy it locally. Chelsea has it, and then I believe right over the border in Melrose, which is basically right on like the Malden border. There is one, so maybe that's where people might be buying it in this area. I would assume. And some in Lynn as well. Thank you. Yeah. Anywhere else? 3 in Lynn? 3 in Lynn. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So again, for some time there weren't really any in this area. As long as I've worked here, it took some time, but now all of a sudden they're kind of popping up all over the place. So the 3 main ways that you can use them, right? There's smoking. There's the, old-fashioned way, quote unquote, using joints, pipes, blunts, water pipes, right? Effects can last up to 4 hours. Time to take effect, right? Sometimes it can be seconds to minutes, but typically a certain amount of minutes, right, is how long it takes. Ingesting, I think it's important we're talking about ingesting here tonight, aka edibles or drinks, right? So that can take 30 minutes or it can take 2 hours, and it can sometimes last as long as 6 to 8 hours. Why ingesting can be a little bit nerve-wracking, right, is because, as we see, right, it takes some time for it to settle in. So you might have someone have an edible, right, maybe a piece of chocolate or a gummy or something, and they're like, why aren't I feeling it? Why aren't I feeling it? And then they take another, and they're like, well, I'm still not feeling it, right? And then all of a sudden, they're going to get hit by it because, again, the onset takes a little bit of time because you're eating it, you're ingesting it. And then again, why we're here as well is vaping or dabbing, right? But so a lot of the devices we talked about earlier, the nicotine devices, some people put THC in them, some people just put THC in them, right? Or you can buy some vapes that are only THC, right? That can take seconds to minutes, but again, it all depends on the product you're using. So these are just some examples, right, of some of the ways in which that they're sold for ingesting, for eating or drinking. In Massachusetts, we have some restrictive labeling to not make them as appealing, right? Some other states have that the same way where it's legal. Because, if you see, say, this at home, I would not first think, I would just think, that's a gummy, right? But if you don't read this, you're not going to see that it's actually infused with marijuana, right? So for THC devices, you notice that they're very similar, right, to how the vaping devices look for nicotine. I will say there is a slight difference between nicotine devices and then THC devices, is that the THC devices, they're a lot more expensive. That's the big thing. They're a lot more expensive, the THC vaping, but they're also a lot more sleek. They look very much less like the nicotine ones, right? Like, if I asked you, like, what would someone think this is? A charger, right? A charger. To me, this kind of looks like a thermometer, like a meat thermometer, maybe, right? I sometimes think this might be like a USB. Yeah, exactly. USB. Yeah. Maybe like a Swiss Army knife. I don't know. But again, they make these very discreet. They make them very sleek, so it's very hard for people to be able to tell that you're using, right? That's what these companies have decided to do, right? And diabolical in my opinion, right? But they've made these products look this way so you can use them anywhere, right?
A mother asked if could it be sold on Amazon?
So that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I do not. You can't buy cannabis on Amazon. But yes. Yeah.
I think the device you can't.
Device, yeah.
Regulated by, like, you have to click on a website and say you're 21, but the pieces to it, I think, I'm looking at it right now, and seeing if it's service.
Yeah. So again, just as a, right, if someone is smoking the leaf, right, from marijuana, right, you can smell it. Like, you know that someone's using it. It's a very strong stench, right? But using THC vaping, right, marijuana vaping, you don't know that it's being used, right? So someone could be out and about at a concert, a sporting event, on the train even, right, and use it and no one has any idea, right? They've made it very, very easy to hide, which is very hard on schools, obviously. So these are just some examples, right, of THC vaping products. This is a very important fact to know, right? So studies have shown that the strength of marijuana, right, of THC has grown exponentially over the years as people study it a lot more, right? So in the early 1990s, the average concentration in effectiveness in marijuana was around 3.8%. They've done some studies that said that today, the average potency inside marijuana or THC today now is around 50%. In some samples exceeded upwards of 80%, right? So that's why you even hear this from, kind of like older folks, right, who say, oh, when I used to smoke in the 60s or 70s, you would feel a little bit, but when I smoke now, it's like way, way higher, right? It's almost like drinking a beer, right, which has a small alcohol content, and then having, I don't know, some sort of strong alcohol like tequila or rum, right, where there's a much higher concentrate, right? And that's basically what THC is very much so today. Like, it's like that tequila, right, like that rum, where it has a high amount of what gets you high, right? Whereas back in the day, it wasn't as strong. So that's why some kids who may use an edible or smoke, it really impacts them because the products today are so strong, unfortunately. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to say too, there was kind of a little wave a couple years ago of counterfeit THC or counterfeit marijuana vaping devices that were being illegally made in China, Mexico, here in the United States. Some of them contained nicotine, but a lot of them contained THC, and they were being sold illegally, right? And getting kids very, very sick, like really affecting their lungs. This is not something that happened to everyone, widespread all over the place, right? But there were cases popping up in certain parts of the country of people using these illegal devices that were illegally made and getting very, very sick, right? Like this in particular was a picture of one of the illegal devices. You may even notice, right? That's Sour Patch Kids, right? That's a popular candy. Legally, Sour Patch Kids would not be allowed to do this, right? So this is clearly fake, right? Same with these down here, which are from Disney, right? They have Disney characters on these THC devices, and like Disney would never allow their products to be sold on vaping devices, right? So we haven't heard as much about counterfeit or illegally made THC or nicotine, but it's something that still should be considered, right? It's not like I'm sitting here saying, if your kid is going to use, make sure it's from a legal place. But there is this sense that it's scary no matter where you get it from, but especially if it's made in this way. So just again, it's very easy to get negative at these type of events and think, oh, everyone uses, everyone does it. But I guess it's very important to always highlight that there is a lot of good and positive things, right? So 77% of Revere high school students have never even tried marijuana before on that survey that they reported, right? Only 4.1 of students were reported to regularly use marijuana, right? So that 30% rate means, that 30-day rate means regular usage. And a slight change here, y'all might notice, right? So when we talked about nicotine vaping, the average age of when they first started was 13 or 14. For marijuana, kids typically start trying this at 15 to 16, right? So they reported starting it a little bit later, right? So nicotine vaping, students started kind of using when they were in 8th grade, freshman year time frame, but marijuana was a little bit later. It was like freshman, sophomore year, a little bit more so. So, any questions so far on the marijuana portion? Doing good on time. Any questions? Okay, cool. So just some of the health effects of marijuana use, right? So, red eyes, right? That's one of the typical giveaways, is that their eyes look like a little bit droopy, right? Their eyes they might be bloodshot, but distorted perception to sight, sound, time, or touch, a delayed reaction time. They may feel nauseous, maybe poor muscle or limb coordination, maybe mild hallucinations, or maybe a little bit more paranoid, especially more so when they use a lot. But yeah, an initial loudness. So again, just kind of a change in the mood, right? So a lot of times that's very slowed down, right? Nicotine is an accelerant drug, right? Nicotine kind of gets you going, but marijuana kind of takes people down, right? And it kind of removes themselves. The long-term effects of cannabis use, right? So you have an effect on the lungs, right? Especially if you're inhaling through vaping or through vaping marijuana, or for smoking marijuana, like the leaf itself, right? So you might have issues with cough, phlegm, chest tightness, increased risk of lung infection. You might have an increased heart rate. And then the biggest one too, again, outside just the health effects physically, but mentally, you have the risk of dependence. So one of the big, I think, kind of myths out there is that people say, oh, marijuana is not addictive, right? So yes, marijuana does not have the same addictive chemicals in it that nicotine does. However, there becomes like a psychological dependence that is very much at risk for people, right? So most people with substance use disorders initiate substance use before they're 18, and more than 95% before the age of 25, right? So this is when you might start kids using at a young age. They might become dependent on that high and start using. Jill, do you have any thoughts on what you might hear from the school health people? You or Chris, do you guys ever hear anything, what they hear from students at the health center or anything?
Yeah, no.
I think I guess this is more medium term, but like students who already have signs of anxiety and depression, prolonged use of marijuana really exacerbates that and kind of creates lots of times, where there's sort of panic attacks that happen and it lingers on, you know what I mean? Even the next day, even though the high is gone, the THC is still in their system, and that prolonged over time has a lot of like mental health challenges that we deal with, because students who are nervous or anxious or depressed use this because when they're using it, they feel better. Mm-hmm. And then when they're not using it, they feel much worse than they did. Yeah. So then they need to get higher. Yeah. And it just is a cycle. So that is, I think, that's not really as long-term, but that's a thing we deal with a lot with our counselors, with our social workers, because they smoke because they're depressed or they're anxious, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. And I would say to add, I know I've watched like a lot of things. There was a few years back, I forget what station it was on. I don't know if it was Vice Channel or not. They did almost like kind of like a reality show. There are some what we call recovery high schools in the area. There's one in Boston and there's one in Beverly that are high schools that support current high school age students that are in the midst of facing an addiction. They're dealing with whether it's heroin use, whether it's opiate addiction of any form. It could be any type of addiction. And the one in Beverly is very supportive of these students, and they actually, in this documentary, followed a few students. And one of the things that was kind of noted when the students would talk about why they used, often or not, one student said, I could never focus, I felt like I had ADHD, I never knew what it was, but I used marijuana to help me focus and relax and feel normal. There was another girl that talked about how she was depressed and using drugs or whatever, I forget which drug she was using, but it helped her feel normal, and when she wasn't using, those feelings were coming back. So a lot of the times, our kiddos are trying to self-medicate in a way. In our nurses' offices and medical staff, when there has been a situation where a student has used, our biggest concerns are the vape, because it is such a potent amount, a strong concentrated amount of THC that somebody may be using and they don't realize how much they've put in their body, and then it's almost too late because now they are vomiting, they feel dizzy, they are seeing things, and it's rapid heart rate that is almost medically, our support staff can't get down. It's almost, they need to be hospitalized or sent to a doctor. Same with edibles. Edibles has kind of been the same trend that, again, because it takes so much longer to react, people are consuming it, eating it, and not realizing, whoa, I've had way too much. And the way it's broken down in the body is a little different, that it has more immediate, like, serious effects that can even affect grown adults when overconsumed. So, but most of the time, like, we've seen just if there has been consumption of THC vape of some sort, it's the vomiting has been really bad, and that sense of rapid heart rate again, and just like anxiousness, and then it's come out a lot of the times after when our support staff has asked the student, they'll own up to maybe taking a hit of a vape that has THC or something in it. So, but I know I'm coming from the middle school health world, and when I would talk to my middle school students about it, I would say the biggest, I would say I would always alert them, like, edibles and vape you should be really scared about, because you can take in way too much that can be really physically dangerous for your body. And now in this day and age, you don't even know what's really in that liquid that's in that vape anymore, because people can tamper it and put things in it. So I think that's our biggest, on the health world, it's the scariness of them taking in too much that then can be an immediate medical problem that may need a hospital situation. So.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so that's just, again, some of the big takeaways, right, is a lot of kids have reported using to help cope, right, to help cope with the daily pressures and stressors of life. School in particular, right, was one of the biggest things that we heard from a lot of kids, that they feel they feel a lot of pressure to do well in school, or just the regular daily rigors of school, right? So just a lot of kids aren't really so much using for pleasure, right? They're more using to help them, as they say, help them get through, right? Even though that might be the case. So we kind of talked about this earlier, right? But, right, like that sculpture I was talking about earlier with the brain, right? It's the same for using marijuana, right? For constructing the brain, right? It's really not good to throw marijuana into the mix when you have a developing brain. We know a lot how it can really affect your memory, your attention span, as well for marijuana, right? So again, the biggest thing is, it's not to sit here and say, hey, when you turn 25, use whatever you want. That's not what we want to say, but we do want to really say to our young people, like, so that you know, it's like baking a cake. If you burn your cake, you can't take it out of the oven and put it back in and hope it comes out better, right? Your brain is your brain. You can't really change it once it's past 25. So.
Ryan, can I add something to
Sure.
Yeah.
Your children's brains, the last part of their brain to develop is the front part of their brain that is, and surprise, surprise to all of us, is our emotions. That's why our kids are disasters when it comes to their emotions and all that. But also that's where your decision making is. So the best way to explain it is the part of their brain that is like the gas pedal to a car. When they're a teenager, it's working, it's going. It's like, let's do this, let's do things. But the problem is, it's like driving a car without a brake, because that front part of the brain is the part that tells us to, hey, pause for a minute. Let's think about this and think through the consequences. So our kiddos are frustrating because we have to repeat ourselves all the time because their brain isn't fully developed there yet. So that repetition and that consequence is really what helps develop it. And it's scary because as much as we're like, they should know, their brains are really working against them. They're driving a race car without a brake right now. And that decision making, again, is not, that's the last part to develop. So normally that's starting to really come into fruition in like your 20s, your early 20s. So it's really hard. And being at the middle school level, I used to tell the students all the time, there's nothing wrong with you. Your body is just working against you at the moment, so I may have to say the same thing to you 500 times because your brain just doesn't get it yet. So if you're frustrated with your kiddos, it's their brain. And I used to tell them, like, tell your parents, like, sorry, but it's my teenage brain that's getting in the way. I'm trying here. So.
Wish I had been able to use that when I was younger. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just an idiot. Yeah. But so just, we want to end this on, again, a positive note and share that there's a lot of positive in this, right? That not as many people use as we think. It's not to say that those that don't, we shouldn't care about and focus on, but I just think it's always important to be that cup half full type deal, right? That the majority of students aren't, because there's so much doom and gloom of like everyone's doing it. When in reality, that perception is sometimes bad, right? But so tips to just begin a conversation, right? I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to sit here and say I know how it works with my kid because I don't have a child. I will say, but these are just things that we've heard from focus groups, but also just things that we've researched as well. But just asking permission to talk about the conversation, expressing empathy, having an honest conversation without judgment, open-ended questions, and then watching body language. Again, it can be really hard. I was nervous coming in earlier trying to talk to the folks who were in this room before to have them, like, hey, we have something at 6:30, right? I can't imagine what it's like to talk to to your child, right? But these are just some biggest things, because I can tell you if you go in there and start yelling at them and point the finger, I don't know if that's going to change a lot, right? But going in there and asking, well, why are you using? Do are a lot of your peers doing it? Like, what are the reasons why this is happening? Like, what are some ways that we can make you, like, what are some things you could do outside of that, right? Like, I have a friend of mine who is very much addicted to nicotine and uses a vape device all the time, right? And when I talk to him about it, I'm like, well, what else could you do instead of use that vape, right? What are some other ways you could cope to not have to rely on this, right? Outside of trying to get treatment to help with this nicotine addiction, but also, like, what are some other things we can do, right? Right. So just, again, some of these open-ended questions. What do you know what's inside of them, right? Try and kind of have them solve the problem themselves to see why it's harmful, right? Like, do you even know what's in them? Like what do you think comes inside them? Where do you think they come from, right? Is one of the big things. Yeah.
I think that comes up a lot of times in high school is the question of, like, are you smoking on Friday or Saturday night at a party? Or are you doing this every day because that's how you need to function? And there's a big difference between the two, right? And I think I have found in working with our council, like, framing that kind of question of saying, like, listen, we know this is going to be a thing youth experiment with. Where are you on that spectrum? As opposed to saying, do you do this bad? Do you not do this good? Just kind of saying, like, and every student agrees there's a difference between, I did this Saturday night at a party, and that was fun.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate conversation, versus I have to do this the first thing when I wake up, or else I don't feel normal. And I think I have found that a nice opening to the conversation a lot of times with students. And when they're talking with me, they're usually, like, in trouble about it because it's something happening in school, but just kind of normalizing that and saying, like, where are you on that spectrum? I have found it opens the conversation a lot.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And I would say too, on my end, like, being in the classroom a lot, like, and being in a health ed classroom with students, and I had students for almost 3 years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so they felt comfortable with me. And some kids would get in trouble. They'd be out maybe on a suspension or something like that. And then if they would say to me, like, Miss, I was out, I did something stupid. I'm like, well, yeah, okay, so why'd you do it? And just having that conversation with them, like, why did you want to sell to your friends? Or why did you use that in the bathroom? And a lot of the time just getting them to think through it and then have, like, that conversation of, like, what could be done differently and help them with that decision-making side of it. I feel like, to our young adolescents, a lot of the times I heard at the middle school level is like, no one cares about me, no one listens to me, no one cares. And it's like, well, I'm going to take some time and listen and ask you questions. And I think a lot of students and teens, like, appreciate that because they feel like no one gets me, they don't care about me, all I do is get yelled at. Middle school especially, that's all they say. All adults just yell at me. And it's like, no, we can talk to you too. So, but I think just asking questions and support. I think also, forget, there was something else that I wanted to mention. Oh, this was also mentioned at the webinar regarding Narcan and whatnot that the city had put on with our superintendent of schools. Mr. Bowen was on it. Sometimes people are like, well, like, what are some like maybe ways that I could help my student continue to make good choices, or maybe go down an avenue that doesn't involve these things? And one of the biggest factors that they find in helping teenagers avoid is having positive outlets for them to go to. So whether it's something at a rec department, an after-school program, a club, or a passion that they're involved in, they see in a lot of research that the more that a student has access to those things, the less likely they are to use. And I know some of our professional athletes have been very vocal about it. Like, if I didn't have my after-school Boys and Girls Club, I probably would have been doing what all of my friends were doing after school. I got to go and play basketball afternoon. Or like some students would say, I found the art room and I spend the day in the art room. So trying to find a passion that a student has or an interest in, a lot of the times will create a positive atmosphere, create positive relationships that then they feel empowered that they don't need to do the other stuff, where they want to make better choices and whatnot. It's not 100% guarantee, but it's something. So, and I know that we've, as a wellness committee in the district, we've been trying to bring in a lot of community partners like the rec and whatnot, and we're working on trying to promote that to the community of all these different things, and also problem solving. Why it's not available to everybody? Is it cost? Is it the promotion of it and whatnot? So we're really trying to build up those things so that there's a lot of positive that maybe will help students not go in the other avenue of some of the negative stuff.
These are just some, this is last slide, come to the end. So these are just some free resources for youth interested in quitting nicotine. This is, doesn't really talk about marijuana as much, but MGH has Living Tobacco Free, one-on-one coaching by telephone, video, or in person. There's also just, your primary care physician, right? So your child's doctor could be helpful in finding resources. There's the Truth Initiative, which is free. Text Vape Free Mass, and you can get consultation. My Life, My Quit has a real-time chatting line by text or phone, right? So there's a lot of resources out there to help quit nicotine, right? They may be able to help a little bit with marijuana, depending on maybe who you get, but they're mostly suited for nicotine. But again, you are very well resourced here in Revere for the school social work staff and the MGH School-Based Health Center. There's a lot of people who can help people that are here at Revere. So, any final questions or thoughts? I know it kind of was just us talking, and then you were like, "Great, cool." So. Any other questions? All right, well, this has been amazing. It doesn't matter how many people come, it matters that you're here. And we really, really appreciate you coming, and the community's, better off for it. So again, thank you so much for coming. There's probably a lot of pizza back there still. So take stuff home. So, all right, but thank you everybody. Thanks so much.